We're ready. So we'll reconvene the May, I guess today's the 4th, May 3rd and 4th meeting of the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission here in lovely Grand Junction.
Cinco de Mayo.
Thank you much to Ron Velarde, Regional Manager, and his team. JT, and all of the host team that put on that wonderful picnic barbecue last night. I enjoyed it, as I always do, and I hope all of you did as well. We've got a very full agenda this morning. I want to point out a couple of things really quickly. We are going to hear right off the top from Bob about yesterday's outcome and other issues that the director is going to address. I want to tell you that on the third agenda item, RFP funding alternatives, now I'm not inviting us to run off the mouth, although I'm the lead example of that. So, but we will take longer if necessary to fully discuss RFP alternatives, which means that, and we had talked earlier about the possibility of shortening this, and JT, we mean no insult to you, but I'm hoping that you can do your cameo update in something more like 45 minutes than the hour that's suggested here. So then we have the remainder of the agenda. So we also want to welcome Commissioner Jeannie Horn, who joins us this morning. So we're at full complement of appointed members. Are we going to have any legal counsel in the room? Bob, do we know? None at all. Okay. All right. So there.
John Howard's an attorney.
So yeah. So we're gonna. We'll have to rely on our only trained legal mind, Mr. Howard. But given unless Amy, are you an attorney? No?
Sure not.
Okay, well, we're gonna wing it with the assistance of Mr. Howard, and which, you know, that also means there's probably more power that accrues to the chair to adjudicate any differorences around the table.
Dictatorship.
There you go. So with that, we'll start with Mr. Broscheid, and you've got a story to tell us, I guess.
Unfortunately, it's kind of a bad story, but good morning, Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. Rough day yesterday. The fee bill or sustainability bill was voted down 3-2 in the Senate Finance Committee yesterday. It was just, that was the first committee that went through, went over to the Senate, as the Senate was going to consider passage of that bill. And you know, there's probably there's probably a book you can write on how legislation, or how the schoolhouse rock, how a bill becomes a law, kind of a thing, and it's nothing like that. And but I'll tell you, you know, a lot of work has gone into this, and not just from the Department of Natural Resources and our legislative liaison, but the agency. And this is a 1,000-person in our agency effort, as well as the commission. I know you guys were intimately involved, and it just wasn't enough to get it over the finish line. And unfortunately, there's a lot of other things that came up, and there's a lot of confusion. I think what probably most of the confusion was there's 24 amendments that were amended onto this bill, and some friendly, some not so friendly, and some were just deals that had to be cut to get this bill through and to get sponsors' names on it. And for a lot of you that have done this for a living, this isn't anything unusual. But I tell you that probably the biggest positive that's coming out of this is the members and the work and the sportsman organizations, the conservation groups, the associations that showed up in force. It had to be in the hundreds from anything from the small town of Meeker to Club 20 to the Cattlemen's Association and all of the other conservation groups that signed on local, regional, and national level. That's a coalition, and that's a coalition that that believes in what we do and believes in the user pay, user benefit model. And I think to me that coalition was something that I've never seen as a group that came together on such diverse issues sometimes, but can come together for one. And I think that was a real positive of that. Other than that, I can't speak for the senators that voted no, but we did get a lot of feedback yesterday about what we're doing, and I think we still got a lot of outreach to do. And they don't understand what we do and why we do it and how we're funded and how these programs are important to Colorado. I will tell you, my experiences, a lot of these kind of very complex financial bills will take more than one session to get through. And I think we laid a lot of groundwork this year. And then I think we'll just regroup, and then I think we can come back and talk about where we're going, because certainly the financial needs of the agency are still there. And as every passing year goes, it's going to get a little tighter, and it's a little tighter. And so it's definitely a high priority. I think we have to sit down with the department and just figure out where we're going from here, and keep going. And lessons learned as we go, and stay positive, keep our folks engaged. But we were close. We were really close. And I think to try to pass a bill on its first try through this legislature, I think it would have been unprecedented to see a bill like this go through. There's a lot of issues. There's a lot of end of session things. A lot of Monday morning quarterbacking can go on, but it was a big disappointment. I know it was for our constituents as well. But that's sometimes how it goes. Somebody asked, and they said, well, what happened? And I said, it's politics. Politics is what gets a bill through, and politics is what gets a bill killed. And you just hope you're on the right side of politics as you go. But I think it definitely shows we're not immune to a lot of the political issues that are going on. And so other than that, I want to thank everybody on staff, particularly Doug Vilsack, Jeff, you and your folks. I can honestly tell you there were weekends after weekends after weekends, Saturday, Sundays, all through. This didn't stop. And the heart and soul and dedication, and then every other person, I don't care if you talk to your county board of supervisor or your local sportsman group, that's the uplifting part of this. And you all, just as much in Denver as you did out here in the regions, particularly you guys as commissioners, I know you all make calls. I can't thank you enough. It's worth the fight. And it's what you do keeps us going. So you've actually helped me stay motivated during these times, because I'll tell you, it was the worst roller coaster ride I've ever been on. It's watching a bill and where votes are going and what we're doing. But we made it pretty dang far. And I'm really proud of not just our staff, but our friends, our partners. And it's truly remarkable. It keeps the fire burning, and we've got a lot of work to do still. A lot of work to do. Some of the things that came out as well, Mr. Chair, was some of the unfriendly amendments, and the one takeaway is this user pay model. Well, there were a lot of folks who didn't want to pay. They were looking for exemptions on how not to pay into the system of conservation, and that's one of the disheartening parts. Is this? We're not here where we are today because a lot of people refuse to pay, and those costs are going up, and it's your willingness to spend your discretionary income on passes, permits, licenses, everything else, and I understand that. But at the same time, if there are folks who are trying to be exempted but still utilize the resource, that's where we're going to start running into some issues. So I just hope next year we can regroup, and we'll see if we can run another bill next year. So we're going to need your full support. We're going to do a post-mortem on this and see what we can do better next year. and give it a go. It's definitely worth fighting for, and certainly to hear a lot of the testimony that you guys spent out of your days. I know you missed work. You're not getting paid to get down to the legislature, make these phone calls. That's really the uplifting part, Mr. Chair. So I can answer, I think this is pretty much what we've been doing the last 2 months. So I summed up almost my entire calendar in about 10 minutes.
Commissioner, questions or comments? Mr. Roshak? I've got absent hearing any. I do think we need to take note of the fact that Bob and his team, Jeff, Doug Vilsack, the DNR lobbyist, were able to successfully get a acceptable bill, I believe, out of the House by a vote of what, about
42 to 22 or something like that.
pretty strong vote out of the House. And it was, but it was late in the game, the last week of the session, which always complicates things. And secondly, that the bill died in the Senate Finance Committee on a party line 3-2 vote. 3 Republicans against, 2 Democrats for. End of story. End of the road. But that bill becomes, in effect, the foundation of what we start with next year. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I would encourage you to do, you and Jeff to do, is brief us, give us an analysis at some subsequent meeting of amendments that need to be peeled off of that starting point. The amendments that are deleterious to the agency, the amendments that you just spoke about that were free riders, folks that want to participate in the resource but not contribute toward it. Because I would encourage that we start next year not presuming that this is the absolute starting point, what we ended up with this year, but rather a cleaner product going into the next session. And the way to do that, of course, is to be well prepared with, here's the best argument for or against any particular amendment or issue that's addressed in the legislation. I think that'd be very important. So, Mr. Howard.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to thank staff and our fellow directors and the Sportsman's Group who have been lighting up my phone now for a couple of months on various issues, including this one. I just wanted, Mr. Chairman, to also kind of amend your statement a little bit with a comment. I went to the Sportsman's Day, as I think maybe some others did, at the Capitol, and we did have a Republican sponsor in the House from Salida. Bob, help me. Wilson, Representative Wilson, who was a very strong, very impressive presentation. So I would hold out hope for a bipartisan answer next year and not, be divided politically completely.
Well, that's a point well taken. It was true in the House, but it was not true in the Senate.
I understand.
Yes, all due credit to Representative Wilson, and there were several other Republicans that voted for in the House for the final passage of the bill. In fact, you could provide us that list. Mm-hmm. That would be swell. But these things always get tangled up with a lot of other bigger issues, and so.
Mr. Chair, I think I'd be remiss in not thanking the sponsors, both the House and Senate sponsors. I forgot to mention, but with Jenny Arndt and Jim Wilson on the House side, and then Don Coram from Montrose over here, as well as Senator Fenberg. Those were the 2 Senate sponsors, and boy, we put them through hell. I mean, with the amendments and the work that we did, and to thank them, they put their heart and soul into this, and they bent the arms of a lot of their members to get it to where it was, and they're truly supporters of the agency, I just can't thank them enough. It's not easy to sponsor a bill like this, especially with everything that's going on, and if there's a special session that's going to come out of when they go sine die next week. So can't thank them enough. They're big supporters of it, and we've got friends. We do have friends, and we've got to continue to cultivate those friendships, and hopefully this will turn into something productive next year.
Okay, very good. Any other questions, comments? Okay, we're going to, Margaret Taylor, please come on up on OHV grant funding, please, Margaret. Coffee, get coffee.
Ready to go.
Say good morning.
Okay,
Thank you. Commissioners, my name is Margaret Taylor. I'm the Assistant Director of Capital Parks and Trails. And I am here today as a poor substitute for Nick Delaca, who was going to present this, and his wife just had a baby on Monday. And he was still going to come down and present this. And I said, if I was your wife, I think I would kill you. So I'm here to present this. And I apologize now, I have a cold too, so you might have to bear with me. But what we're here to talk about today is the 2017-2018 OHV Trails Grants summary, and this is an action item for your approval at the end of my presentation. So just to remind everyone how the Trails Grant application review process goes, it's a 4-tiered review and approval process. All grant applications are reviewed by CPW wildlife field biologists and regional staff after the applications are completed. Then they're evaluated and scored by a grant review and ranking subcommittee. Then they go to the State Trails Program who looks at the amount of money that we have and decides where we think we can fund them. And then they go to the State Trails Committee for evaluation and ranking and order. So, and then they're here. So that's what we're talking about today. Just a reminder that, oh my gosh, I don't know if there's anything more reviewed than these particular grants. So, just to also remind everyone that we do take public comments within the process. And so all the grants are posted on the State Trails website. And public comments are, when they come in, we give them to the subcommittees, the Trails Program, the GOCO grant reviewers, the region staff, and what we do is we review every public comment. And we do look at those comments, and we a lot of times respond internally to those comments. So with you're going to see how many grant applications we had, but there was only 4 that we had to do some additional wildlife review. And that's really good. What we're seeing in these OHV projects is that most of the time they are maintenance projects, and so the wildlife review or wildlife mitigations is minimal. So you can see that, and then if you look at it, the stipulations that we had within the grant agreement for these projects, it's just making sure that we're working with our local staff to avoid project work during calving season, or letting us know for the last 3, letting us know more specific information on what exactly they're going to do once they get the grants, and working with our CPW staff to make sure that we're looking at those projects on the ground. So it's been very, very good. Okay, so I know this is a busy slide, but a couple things to go over here. You can see that we received 65 grant applications, and that totaled $6.3 million. We never have that much money to spend, but that's about an average number of what we get for requests, although it is higher than last year. You can see that we had 21 good management applications and 44 competitive grant applications. And just to remind you about our 2 programs within the OHV program, is we have good management crews. Those are crews that have proven to us that they can go year after year, and there's areas that need OHV work year after year, and instead of going into the competitive process, once they've proven that they meet that good management status, we fund them. And this is really good for our partners, especially the federal partners, so they know every year that they can hire staff and do the work that they need to do. So the Good Management Program is a very good one. It's very innovative for actually in the country. If you look at these percentages, again, I mentioned this, but just make sure that you know that most of the work is maintenance. There's about 12% of enforcement and visitor contacts that we fund, 26% equipment, and then if you look at that 17%, that's planning and travel management plan implementation, and that's where, if we were to build a new trail, that's kind of where that lives. So, again, not much new trail in the OHV program. So if you look at the amount of funds available for this year, we had our normal $4.2 million, which is a pretty average funding amount for OHV sticker money. So again, much like hunters and anglers, OHV and snowmobilers have said that they want to tax themselves and provide money to take care of what they have. And so that $4.2 million, again, comes from that sticker, that registration. Also, we have some federal dollars in there called RTP, which is a trails funding program through the U.S. Department of Transportation. And I must say, our staff is doing a very, very good job of kind of cleaning up money from our federal partners, really getting a handle on where we have money and where we need to spend it. So you see that extra $275,000, and we were able to put into the program this year. So we actually had more money to put into the program this year. Okay, so this slide is just going to show you the amount of requests that we had per land management agency for the various good management crews. You can see that most of the good management crews come from the U.S. Forest Service, and the second would be BLM, and they will be the first to tell you how much they appreciate this funding and how much of a difference it makes on our federal land. We do have one good management crew, actually two good management crews that are on Colorado State Parks. So if you see that CSP, that's what that means. So this is the competitive grant application breakdown. Again, you're mostly seeing U.S. Forest Service, BLM, and our own agency. And you can see that there are counties and nonprofits that also can put into this. Most of the time, the nonprofits are working on federal land. It worked, Adrian. Okay, so what you're looking at here now is the breakdown of funding, and this is kind of small, so let me see if I can even see it on here. So what you're seeing here is the amount requested, and this is good management crews. So the amount requested and the amount that we think that should be funded this year and should be approved by the Parks and Wildlife Commission. We do fund all of the good management crews as long as they're in good status. And we did have a couple crews that wanted to be added to the good management crew. People want to be added all the time because, again, it's something that we do year after year after year, but we didn't allow those two applicants into the process. So this is something that you see every year. If you look at this slide, make this bigger for myself. Okay, so what we do is, I didn't want to do that. Darn it. I apologize. Okay, so if you see this slide, and again, you have this in your packet, so you should have that where it's bigger. But in any case, these projects are all scored, and what makes sense is that the highest scores get the first source of funding. So if you look down here, this is what we're recommending funding, and then we'll draw the line right here at the 75% score. And that is it. That's the abbreviated version. Is there any questions about this year's?
Margaret, was, on that list, I couldn't see it well enough, is the law enforcement program in there too,
So
separate?
the law enforcement program It depends on what part of it is. If it's our internal program, it's not in here because it doesn't go through the grant
Competitive
process.
right.
So our program isn't funded through here, it's just something we do within the agency. But sometimes the land management agencies will use some of their grants for
Yeah,
law
I'm
enforcement.
talking about our standing law enforcement. That's a separate appropriate, or
That's separate, and it's continuing, it's not a pilot anymore, it's something that we do every year.
Right. Any questions? Jill?
Thanks, Margaret, and thanks for enduring your cold. I'm sure was lots of you guys have been very taxed lately, so thank you to all the staff for everything you guys have been doing on the sustainability bill and while continuing your own jobs. You mentioned these are probably the most reviewed of all the grants. I'm glad to hear that. That's something obviously we've been talking about for as long as I've been on the commission, 5 years, of how do we make sure that we're not building trails through, elk calving grounds or whatever it may be. So I just want to say thank you. I appreciate the recognition of that. Do you feel like the State Trails Committee and the folks involved in this is a pretty good diverse makeup, and definitely we have representation across the board? Because I know that was another, not point of contention is much too strong, but I know that was another concern.
Sure. So what I will say is that I personally think that our State Trails Committee is one of the best in the country. And that is because we don't differentiate between, we don't have a separate committee for OHV and non-motorized, which you do see in some other states, which tends to bring some contentiousness, and there's just a natural contention there. So I would say that that's one thing that we do very well. I think that our State Trails Committee looks at everything and very seriously looks at all of the comments that come in, and that's very important to them. We do have 3 vacancies, and we are conducting interviews, and so next month you will see some candidates for your approval if you choose. So that group, we had a great turnout for the amount of people that applied, and from everything I'm seeing, that group has a broad range of experience and backgrounds.
Please.
That's great. That was another question, is where are we at with the vacancies? Do we have like a separate subcommittee that's, for lack of a better term, a hiring committee, or how are we selecting those, or are they constitutionally, they have to be from Western Slope or Eastern Slope, or?
So the statute actually is pretty broad. It just says that you have to be a trail user, which is like 80-90% of the population. So we don't have stipulations that we need X number of trail users. It's done by congressional district, and so we have 3 congressional districts that are vacant right now. We do have a committee, and your very own Chairman Pribble is on the committee. And so we are looking to, we actually had those scheduled, but that darn baby got in the way. And so Nick is looking to reschedule those for next week.
Okay. Very good, Margaret. So is there no more questions? I'll entertain a motion to approve the 2017 OHV grant. I think we need to take grant program.
So move.
Moved by Mr. Bray, second by Mr. Peisel. This will be a voice vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None? Grant program approved for the 2017 OHV grants. Thank you, Margaret.
And I'm up here again,
Oh,
the director. Did I mess this all up?
are you, you don't have any more, do you, Margaret? That's it?
Now the next RFP.
Oh, I'm sorry? Now is the RFP discussion. All right, so while we're getting, now we're going to proceed into the RFP agenda item, but, well, yeah, all right, that's good. Let's do that then. So now we're going to the next item on the agenda, item number 20, 2017 RFP funding alternatives.
So this is going to be a joint presentation by me and the director, and I only have a couple slides that will kind of orient everyone to the discussion again. This is a discussion that we've had numerous times, and if you remember where we were from last meeting, the 2017 RFP was put on pause, and you asked us to come back and give some more information on what that money could potentially be used for. And so Dan Prenslow, who couldn't be here today, actually mostly took the lead on talking to the Habitat Stamp Committee and vetting out some ideas. But I just wanted to go over, again, some data that we have now that I didn't have last time because we've recently put together a fact sheet. And so it's just kind of interesting information. So since 2007, the RFP program has leveraged $130 million to protect 230,000 acres of conservation easements, 117 acres of public access, 36 miles of fishing access, and what has been a contentious issue in this legislative session is 11,000 acres of fee title lands. And I do want to bring that up because to me, that's a very small number, 11,000 acres of fee title in the history of this program. So fee title is just a very, very small portion of this project. If you look at the program in 2016 and 2017, this is the usual amount, we had a budget of $9.3 million. We had 34 landowners submit proposals seeking $41 million worth of work, and you all approved 6 proposals to protect 17,000 acres for $8.1 million. And another important point is that we do such a good job of leveraging this money. So for the 25% of money that we put into this program, we get 75% from partners. I think this is an interesting slide, and it is in our new fact sheet. But if you look at the total history of the RFP program, only 5% has been fee title. Most of it is conservation easement and access. And then if you look at the 2016 applications, it's hard to see, but that's 1% fee title, and the rest are conservation and access. So this is what we really wanted to get into today, and we're talking about potential options for the RFP dollars this year since we're not doing the program. So these are basically what we came up with for options. So one of the things that we can do is bank this revenue and save it for future investments and easements, and that is fine. We also have our CFO here, so he can talk more about that if you have any direct questions about how long we're able to bank that money, but it is possible. We could, in some cases, use that money for long-term permanent investments that are more one-time investments, not operational type costs, such as building highway wildlife crossings, and we've talked about that, conducting dam maintenance, and implementing the West Slope Mule Deer strategy. We could also invest in temporary projects such as the walk-in access program, Corridors for Conservation, which we invested in last year, and operation and maintenance on our properties. Here's the trick, though. In order to do that, we have to have purchased that money through fee title acquisition to use that money on operations and maintenance. And as I had mentioned, we don't buy that much land through this program. So that's a very small sliver of what we could potentially do with this money. I just also wanted to briefly touch on the fact that we are going to meet with partners, and that meeting is going to happen on May 11th at our Partners in the Outdoors Conference in the morning that day, and perhaps Director Broscheid wants to talk a little bit more about that meeting.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, she's right. In the broader discussion about this program, I mean, this is an important program to a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. And I think to continue to engage those folks in the discussion about some version or one of these three or some version of. And we had a great discussion with the Habitat Stamp Committee. Some of the members are here in the audience, and I think they'll tell you it was all over the board. What do we do, and how do we break loose out of this? And certainly not just from, I think, from our side, but as far as the legislative involvement in this program, and how do we not just get projects through that are important to them or to us individually, but how do we ensure this program continues on in some form? And certainly, of course, with the license fee sustainability bill running through, it was, as Margaret talked about, I think 4 amendments that were tacked onto that bill back and forth had to do with fee title. It was very controversial, and it put a lot of organizations that supported the bill on the wrong side. And it's very contentious. And I think as we're looking at the revenue, I think I would just really recommend as we continue to engage and have a broader conversation next week. It's Thursday, I think it's Thursday morning, 9 to 11. And we need to hear from them because they are affected, they are concerned, and they're integral players. And I think getting that feedback from them and start to lay a path forward here that we can all agree to, and not just whether we're going to keep this the same, but we have got to get ahead of a lot of the discussions that have been going on about this program, in particular, what this program means to local landowners, local governments, local legislators, and all of those types of things. So it's not, I wish we could come to you today with a solution and say this is the way we need to go, but I think as we continue those discussions here, I think we'll have some solutions for you really soon, some version of these. And but I think we've also got to start, we as the agency have also been listening to the commission, is what are we going to do with the stuff we have now? We heard that resoundingly in the legislature about existing infrastructure and where do we go. So that's kind of where we are. And I think we're just going to continue to engage all of our partners, or at least as many as we can, and try to help us lay out what the next steps are and what the path forward is. So.
Mr. Discussion. Mr. Pizell?
Go ahead.
Ladies before gentlemen.
I was just curious, thanks, Margaret and Director Burchett. I think, well, I'll just point out the elephant in the room. Should we add a number 4 to potentially, should we talk about potentially reinstating the 2017 program?
Yeah, that's certainly one option.
I feel like that didn't go over so well.
Don't presume silence.
Yeah, no,
Could be.
just waiting to hear the
When
discussion.
dealing with my parents, Commissioner Zimmerman, when I was young, I always took silence to be a yes. So, this might be very helpful to you. So good suggestion from Commissioner Zimmerman. Mr. Pizell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I think it's a good suggestion. I was silent because it just got thrown in front of us, and you're contemplating. That was contemplation. I think all of us would look for a way to reinstate. Is there a disconnect? We don't do that much fee simple, and we are fairly careful about it when we do.
Can you speak up, Dale? We're having some people like this in the audience that can't hear you.
And certainly we need to be reviewed, and we need to have transparency. We look at those projects pretty carefully, but is there a disconnect between the legislature and us about fee simple, and do they believe that we do more than we should, or I don't know, it seems like there's a disconnect, and they don't understand, like what you just said in the fee bill, they don't understand what we do and why we do it. And we're not going out there trying to find. I also agree 100% that if we get these properties, we have to have a plan going forward about how we're going to maintain it, what we're going to do with it, what it's going to be. You can't just be buying properties. Colorado is 50% public, so there's a good argument to say agencies shouldn't have these properties, but still, there are those key properties that we need for, you know, we looked at a park yesterday, and they need some expansion. So anyway, I would talk about Michelle's suggestion, but what do we do between us and the legislature? How do we bring us together or educate them, or they're educating us right now that they want no fee simple? And that, to me, seems a little bit crazy. We need to look at it anyway. Mr. Director.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's, a lot of this is education, there's certainly perceptions out there that we're buying everything, and then there's the reality. And so I think there's a little bit of that education, but, you know, I think there's also a segment of the community or constituency who's saying, you know, maybe we can look at some of these other things too. And that's where, you know, reinstating, I think the RFP is absolutely an option, and there's definitely pros and cons with it. And, you know, I'm not going to play favorites on any one of them, but I think we should at least kind of hear them out a little bit, and also continue on with the Capital Development Committee and start talking to those folks about, you know, are conservation easements on the table or are they not? I mean, I think we're crystal clear wherever they are with fee title. But, you know, it's a really important program. It's got a long history. It's got a lot of benefits. But I think there are some folks that, you know, one of the issues that cropped up was about a long-term access program that isn't one of these. And, you know, could we use those? And so I think we're kind of all over the map, and I think continuing to neck it down into, well, this is what we can do with the program, and then I think come back to you if it is a full reinstatement. Hey, we're all on board. I just feel like we leave somebody behind without having that conversation yet. And I think coming out of the partners conference, I think we'll get a little better view of where we can go. We could easily as June come back and say we're going to reinstate. I mean, I think. We haven't missed any deadlines for saying we're going to go, you know, now that we passed it up, it's locked for a year. I don't think that's the case at all. I think we could launch this in June, we could launch this in October. You know, there's really no timeline there. So I would just recommend that we just kind of take our time, let's listen to everybody, and then we can come back with some solutions for you.
Just follow up, I know, Mr. Ray, but, you know, this is such an important program, and it may be, you know, the idea that it's threatened and could go away, but we also need to, we kind of react to an emergency. And we need to communicate we need to have them on board with this program and what we're doing and the projects. I mean, we're happy to have them look at every project and say, what do you think of this? But I think there was definitely a lack of communication. We all just were kind of going on thinking this is life as we know it. And this is a bit of a wake-up call for us, and we need to, going forward, deal with this yearly.
So I'm going to take Chairman's prerogative for a second because I want to maintain the sequence of the discussion. Two things to keep in mind here. We're talking about the Habitat Stamp-funded RFP program, which was just reauthorized by the General Assembly, 2 years ago, after considerable debate, which fully embraced a variety of mechanisms to preserve land and water in Colorado, including conservation easement, including fee title acquisition, and the loudest critic, as I understand it, or critics, which are still a minority in the legislature in the totality of the process, participated fully in the reauthorization of the RFP program, the Habitat Stamp. And so we have a statute that we're fulfilling with this program. This is not something that, you know, that staff invented out of cloth. And we have an obligation to fulfill the requirements of that statute. So I want to make that point. We're dealing with an existing statutory created program. The current critics of RFP acquisitions participated in that reauthorization debate discussion and agreed to, by the way, a 14-year sunset, as I recall. Is that right, Jeff? So that's what we're talking about, not anything else. Number one, I personally don't want to see us over-inflame this notion that this is a majority opinion out of the legislature. This is one, or it's a small group of critics, and doesn't necessarily represent the majority. In fact, if you took the House vote, which included at least 8 or 10 Republican members voting for the fiscal sustainability bill, there's bipartisan support, quite frankly. And there was some confidence that if we'd have gotten the bill to the floor of the Senate, that there were Republican senatorial votes available for passage of the bill. So with that, Mr. Bray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think all options ought to be on the table. I like what I see here. I'm not saying I'm totally opposed to reopening our RFP process. I'm open to that. Do we have to go all or none? Can't we do some of all of these things? Can't we tweak? Can't we learn from this experience? And I don't think, quite frankly, Mr. Chairman, bashing the legislature is going to get us anywhere.
I've tried that before.
And I think these are good suggestions. I think they're really, I don't think we have to just pick one. I think we can do a combination of things, including looking at the reinstating the RFP process, or at least a portion of it, for easements or whatever. I mean, do we have to go all or none? And I think these are all really good suggestions that are really needed. We've brought them out time and time again. Everyone, the sportsmen continually scream for access, scream for access, scream for access. Legitimately, they want access. Well, here's an idea, number 3, to increase access. So I think we can do a combination of things. I don't think we have to do all one way.
I think we should. I think that's a good idea unless somebody says, I agree. They're all good ideas and
Yeah, I just don't know
Michelle's
what
suggestion.
parameters we have.
Yeah, then we
with
have to
regard
figure out what we're doing.
legislation and-
Yeah.
I agree.
Other comment? Mr. Howard?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and I want to associate myself with Commissioner Bray's comments that we ought to look at all of these options globally and learn from it. One of the things I think is a little bit of flip side of the coin, though, is when we shut down the program, and I was sick for that day. I apologize. I would have voted to shut down, and I think you guys will trust me on that. But I feel a little bit, and I heard this at length from the sportsman's community, some parts of it, that we were essentially negotiating against ourselves, that we were trying to respond to the legislature, not bash the legislature, respond to concerns that I believe are heartfelt concerns by some members of the legislature. And I'm not certain that when we reach that handout and then we lose the fee bill, that that's a negotiating strategy that I would want to do again. I think, we have to decide what we think is right and not either bash the legislature or have any hope that if we take any particular action here at the commission, that that's going to influence the legislature to do what we want. I hope that's clear, but that's just sort of a negotiating lesson I've taken from it. Just on GOCO, I want to highlight again that, we're going to have, if we can't figure out how to spend the money in connection with any of the options, we are going to fund, I believe, a plaintiff's constitutional lawyer, field day, because we're going to have trouble meeting the substantially equal to the 4 quadrants if we can't spend the money in GOCO, because they, of course, match much of this program. So it's important that whether it's through fee title or whether it's through long-term easements, and GOCO has restrictions on easements, sometimes that's a problem. You can't do a short-term easement, you've got to do a longer-term one. We just have to keep that in mind. And so I wanted to suggest, Mr. Chairman, that Emily have some sort of report for us after consultation with, with Margaret and getting instructions from us on what to take back to GOCO about, how long do we have? How does this play out? Are we talking about we can get through a year? and then we have a crisis at GOCO, or is it 2 or 3 years? So we at least can have that in front of us when we think about it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
A good suggestion about the running room with respect to the GOCO funds. So I think it bears explanation for the audience. The GOCO constitutional amendment, as John Howard said, requires that each of the 4 quadrants be funded annually in a substantially equal fashion. So when we, CPW, slow down the program, the RFP program, which uses matching money from GOCO, we're therefore not being able to spend money that GOCO, through the constitutional amendment, is required to spend. And that potentially violates the amendment and could lead to a lawsuit. So that's a very good point that John makes. So I want to hear any other commissioner comment. Not seeing any, go
No,
ahead, Jim.
I completely agree with John. I mean, that GOCO has to be a player in this, and we need their input, along with the sportsmen and everyone else, but GOCO is so key. I'm glad you brought that up.
So let me make the suggestion then, because it sounds fairly consensus, that we add a 4th option, which is reinstate all or part of the 2017 program, as Commissioner Bray suggested, to do a combination of a RFP competition or an O&M spending program, that we hear what Bob learns and team at the Partners Conference meeting. Now, is this the meeting on the Executive Committee on Wednesday morning?
It's Thursday morning.
Thursday morning, okay.
Thursday morning, 9 to 11.
Okay. And then we will return to this discussion at the June meeting.
We'll keep you posted.
And so we want to send a signal to our land conservation partners that there's, quote, still hope for a 2017 capital program.
May I add one thing?
Please.
Thank you. And Chairman, I think you just hit on a incredibly strong point, that this communication piece, we really need to make sure that our partners, once, even if we don't have a decision yet, if we're contemplating a decision, so we can, there may be some sort of restriction or stipulation or opportunity that we aren't aware of that our partners and stakeholders might bring to us if they know we're considering something. And even our staff, maybe there's projects that our staff have been working on that previously didn't fall into whatever it is we had that now, should come forward. So that communication piece, the more we can reach out to our stakeholders and get feedback from them as well as internally, I think the stronger these options are going to be. And yeah, I think I agree with Commissioners Bray and Howard and Behill that let's take this as a learning opportunity and see if we can, really utilize this to fund things that maybe we haven't been able to before. And maybe even, work with the CDC a little bit to say, hey, here's how we're looking at ways we can accomplish things we maybe haven't before.
Mr. Howard?
I just had a question for, I know Justin's going to talk to us here in a sec, but I was as Commissioner Zimmerman was too, at the Parks and Wildlife Subcommittee of GOCO a week or 10 days ago. And I'm just asking this of Emily and Justin, do you have enough direction now to respond? The promise was made that we would give enough direction at the commission so that GOCO could consider many of the things that are up on the dams, all sorts of things. And I'm just wondering, did you get enough here to go back to that subcommittee? Because I hate to go to that subcommittee and get chewed on because I didn't do my job. So.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Justin Rudder, CFO for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. I think this conversation that you are having is similar to the conversation we had with the GOCO board, that there's a lot of options out there. There's some things we can do. I'm not hearing any clear consensus personally coming out of the commission on which direction we're going to go. So I was just asking Emily if she had a clear consensus, and didn't quite get the answer yet.
I'm confused about it.
So clear.
Good morning, Commissioners. So this is a topic that the GOCO board has been discussing for the past few meetings. We had a special CPW committee meeting, as Commissioner Howard said, a couple weeks ago, to kind of think about what our options with the GOCO money is, because it's a little bit different in terms of statute than habitat stamps. So we've been working with CPW staff, the regional managers, to kind of figure out what the scope of need is out there, and you know, we have an opportunity to do some creative things this year. But I think that our committee is looking to CPW for guidance and priorities on this one. And we have another committee meeting on May 25th, and it will certainly be a big agenda item and topic of discussion there. And we'll certainly provide you with more context and options to ruminate over then. So.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, I mean, the reason this is so important is GOCO has worked, very hard with Bob and staff to listen to CPW's priorities and to have us be the starting point. So if we want to, and I'm just using examples, if we want to prioritize dam maintenance on special capital projects one-off, we need to tell them, and they'll respond to that. If we want to prioritize, access easements, we need to tell them, and they'll respond to it, as opposed to the old days where they gave us rules and then we responded back. I mean, that's really the heart of the change. So that's why I'm pressing a little bit. So
So I'm going to have a side conversation with you about the quote "old days," because
fair enough.
quite frankly, that doesn't square with what the procedure had been in the past, which is both sides of the agency, both pre-merger and post-merger, presented a capital and operating spending or program list to GOCO with very specific programmatic and capital spending dollar items. And I'm not sure what the reference point here is. I understand it in the high view, but we've always had the ability as an agency, going back forever, to present the list to GOCO and say, here's our list of visitor centers, programs like environmental education or hunter education or odd, long list. So.
Well, I apologize, Mr. Chairman. I didn't want to litigate the past. And I take that back.
I didn't either, but I wanted to correct the record.
Fair enough.
Fair
enough. I'm just saying, we as a commission, when we're ready, need to give specific direction back to GOCO on the types of projects so that Justin can lay them out and they can react to them. So.
What I'm saying is that's what the previous CFO always did. Presented a list that this commission approved of projects for both sides of the agency. That always happened before. Unless it stopped for some reason, Bob.
No, Mr. Chair, that's right. In discussions, we've been, of course, Emily and Chris, we've been engaged in them ever since that last RFP project was killed by this Capital Development Committee. We've got to address this now because we could be in the same boat as these projects come forward for approval and die. The money is still there, whether they're GOCO funds or Habitat Stamp funds. So they've been awesome as usual in trying to get arms around this monster. And so they'll absolutely be part of the discussion. And I think we can all regroup and now we can move forward and whatever those actions are outside of the RFP. I think we both have this vested interest in trying to reach some common ground and understanding on, where we're going. So the Habitat Stamp is very similar to GOCO. It can only be used for certain things, and so we're in the same boat in that aspect.
And I do want to say that the investment proposal, was approved by the board in March, which
It was a
we talked
proposal
about.
that
Yes,
the agency
yes,
brought
that the
to-
agency put together. So this is GOCO over the past 3 or 4 years has contributed approximately $5 million into the RFP process. So that's this specific pot of money that we're talking about. And in terms of timing, the GOCO investment proposal isn't affected until fiscal year 18-19. So we're not running up against a really tight timeline here, and we have some time to have discussions.
Right. Very good. All right, so let's wrap this item up. We have an understanding, I believe, that we're going to add item 4, which is to potentially reinstate the 2017 RFP program in whole or in part. pending recommendations from the director coming out of his meeting with the conservation community partners that work on these opportunities, and then bring it back to the June meeting. So, Margaret, is that understandable for you? Anything more?
Yes, it is. Thank you. I just wanted to add, just to make sure that it was clear to all the commissioners, that we have put a pause on the 2017 RFP, but we also have put a pause on going to CDC for projects. So we haven't been to the CDC in many months, and that is going to be a challenge when we go back to the CDC, which may be as early as June with projects. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear to everyone, that we have kind of a double pause going on here.
All right, thank you very much. Justin, please come on up, and while you get ready for your presentation on the financial status, I want to announce the appointment of Commissioner Alex Zip to represent the Commission on the Natural Areas Council, position previously held by Commissioner Zimmerman. So staff would take note of that and notify the Natural Areas Council and make sure Alex gets aboard that group. Mr. Rutter, we are at about 9:05 and ready for your financial update.
All right, excellent. I'll see what I can do to speak quickly and get us back on track. I only have a very brief update today. I just wanted to update you on kind of the legislative process for our budget and a couple other small items. As of this week, we do have a long bill that is passed through both houses and conference committee report accepted. CPW did not have any requests for new initiatives within that long bill. However, common policies did increase by $4.8 million total. So within the context of this fee bill, we have not changed anything we're doing, but we're going to be spending $5 million more next year. Of that amount, approximately $1.8 million of that is for salary increases, $650,000 of that's for health, life, dental increases, $330,000 for retirement benefit increases, and $1.7 million for OIT increases. So business as usual, but we need to come up with another $5 million going forward. A companion bill to the long bill was Senate Bill 260, which was a transfer of general fund to various cash funds, including the ANS cash fund. There was approximately $4 million that was transferred to the ANS cash fund, and this came up during the fee bill discussion yesterday. With the $4 million fund balance and a motorboat access grant that we were able to write, we are good for this boating season of ANS and a good portion of next boating season, but perhaps not all. We will see where we end up at the end of the year and reassess for what the fund has available for starting the fiscal or the calendar 2018 boating season. And so that will be a discussion next winter, early spring. And that was, so we are set for fiscal year 18 for our budget. Except for one small item. So we have received a letter from the Department of the Interior. There was actually 2 letters that came together. The letter laid out the secretary or the cabinet secretary's priorities, which is to allow local managers to make the decisions on the items they know best. However, all grants over $100,000 will need to be routed through Washington for approval at this point. So we have our grant applications in for our federal aid dollars. It's $25, $30 million of our budget. All our grants were in. We were on track for approval in about this time frame, mid-May to late May. But all grants will now be delayed for an unknown period of time while they are reviewed at Washington. We are not sure what that means. Region 6 is not sure what that means. Region 6 has complicated the issue a bit further by saying that there's no guarantee that any monies expended on these purposes prior to Washington approval will be eligible for reimbursement. So we're trying to get clarity. Our federal aid coordinators are in, I forget where they are right now, somewhere up north for a regional or for a national meeting of coordinators, and they're trying to get clarity from DC. There's also national organizations that are sending letters trying to get clarity on this issue. From the financial side, we are set up to begin spending on July 1. We can continue all programs if we have clarity that we might be getting approval sometime soon, but there might be a decision point somewhere before July 1, depending on the feedback from Washington.
Can you give us an example of what programs that might affect?
It's broad. It's wildlife side, of course, PRDJ, because these are PRDJ dollars we're talking about. But it's research, it's on the ground work, we have spread these dollars thin and wide. So there's the ability to take cash that is matching those and focus more on priorities if we are assuming that there's going to be some reduction or major delay. There's not one specific thing that's on the line.
Mr. Chair, it's pretty much our hatcheries program, our hunter education, our boating access, our aquatic education, any other land management. These are all federal fish research, terrestrial research and management. It's a big chunk of the agency. Those excise taxes are for those purposes, and we have got to get some resolution on this quick because Justin mentioned this is a reimbursement. We're outlaying the cash and hoping for the reimbursement based on agreed upon work plan. And if that doesn't happen, we'll go through that reserve account very, very quickly. In fact, in a matter of months. So this is a national, very big issue.
So I assume it affects all states the
It
same.
affects every state that gets PR, DJ, state wildlife grants. That's the non-game endangered wildlife programs that we use. Very small, but it's all of those things. And it's not an unusual approach for a new administration to really cast a wide, thin, small net and then throw the fish out. And what they're really trying to get, I think, is what they're trying to get a hold of is the discretionary spending out of Interior and all the Interior agencies, this is not federal money, this is state money, and this is state money that the hunters and anglers have paid into that's owed to the state. The service is a pass-through, but it got caught in the net. So we're working at the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies level. They just sent a very strong letter saying that you need to cut this loose. Some senators are weighing, Senator Tester out of Montana has weighed in. Our governor is weighing in on this as well, but we need to get to resolution fast, or we're going to find ourselves possibly with a bill that federal aid will not pay for. So
So AFWA is involved and WAFA is involved. Good.
Absolutely.
I'd remind, well, I was reminded, let's put it this way. I was reminded, having lunch yesterday with Mesa County Commissioner Scott McGinnis, that the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Interior, David Bernhardt, who I remember meeting years ago, is a former legal counsel and staff member to Scott McGinnis, and worked previous to this appointment for a Denver-based law firm of Brownstein Hyatt Farber for many, many years. So we have a Colorado connection in the Department of Interior that we ought to employ.
yeah, we're working it real hard. AFWA's letter was sent out, I believe, yesterday or the day before, but they've been meeting with the secretary to make sure that we can get this at least through the process. And so hopefully they're working it really hard because, like you said, it's 50 states that and are impacted by this. There's tribal wildlife grants. There's all kinds of things that we need. It's putting the states in a very, very tough spot financially with spending this money, hoping for a reimbursement if it doesn't happen. So anyway, Justin's folks and our federal aid coordinators are working really hard on this. And as soon as we find something out, we'll let you know. But it's caused Justin and I to scratch our heads going, what do we do? And we've been through this before, and most everything's been reimbursed. But in this financial situation, I just want to make sure that we're keeping you all in the loop of what's going on and that we're working real hard to try to get this thing resolved. So,
Any other commissioner questions of Mr. Rudder? Mr. Zip?
Justin, of the you said $5.1 million budget increase,
4.8.
4.8, and a lot of that's going to essentially human resources. How much of that is mandated by state requirements versus what us as an agency can determine if, what do we have control of in that 4.8 million and what is dictated in that increase? And this, this is a very timely, question, I think, to address and to try to inform the public, what we can control as far as expenses and what we can't. So if you could answer that.
Certainly. Of the 4.8, I'd say all of it is driven by policies set by the General Assembly. We do have some control over what performance ratings we issue. So for merit-based increases, there's a matrix based on where you're at in your salary range and what your performance rating is that dictates how much money goes to you. But that's 0.75 of a 2.5% salary increase. So it's a small portion of that salary survey amount that I mentioned earlier. Health, life, dental policies are set by the General Assembly, so we don't have control what employees elect for their coverage, and the General Assembly dictates what we reimburse on that plan coverage or of the premiums. And then OIT is determined centrally as well. It is a governor's office, or it's a governor's request that goes across and then is approved or changed by the General Assembly. But our input's more peripheral on that.
So aside from how internally staff handles performance reviews, none of, aside from that very small portion, essentially this 4.8 million is a mandated increase that we have no control over, correct?
That is correct.
Thanks.
Just so I understand, expenses are going up and income's going down? Is that how it is?
Incomes has been going up, just not as fast as expenses.
Other questions, comments?
I do have one last item. I think one of my first presentations to you, I spoke of how we were understaffed in financial services, and I was working on staffing up. We still have one vacant position, but I did fill a very important one very recently. I hired a new Deputy Chief Financial Officer. His name is David Porter. He comes to us with 12 years of state experience. He has been on the job for 3 weeks, and he is drinking from the fire hose. If you could just stand up real quick, if you get a chance to say hello, he will be joining us frequently.
Thank you. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.
JT? And so JT, if you can do your magic in 40 minutes or so, we'll break at 10.
Is it 40 now?
45, okay.
I just needed edification. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Director Broscheid, JT Ramatsky, Area Wildlife Manager here in Grand Junction. I was told that it was going to be my job to boost the morale and everything after yesterday and the bill and whatnot. And so, well, thank you. The best advice I got was to come up here and do the moonwalk. Or I believe Regional Manager Dorsey, I think it was the sprinkler, and I'll figure that one out. But heeding the chairman's advice to expedite this presentation, I'll do that, and I won't dance. I'll just leave you with that thought and image. My apologies. Thank you so much for letting me be here today for an update on Cameo. This is, as you all know, an incredibly exciting project that we have going on over here in the Northwest region, and especially in Mesa County. Incredible support. Many of the folks who have been supporting this and helping are here in the room today, and we'll probably get a chance to at least thank them. We've got a picture up here on the board right now of kind of the latest draft conceptual design of this facility. And I just want to give you a quick update kind of on the last year of what's really been happening. And the first thing I want to start off with, which I think is the biggest thing, is that the town of Palisade and the mayor, Roger Granite, and Rich Sales, the town manager, are both here today, have been able to take acquisition of the property. So they now own this property, and we are working with them. So that's been a tremendous success. This is a very complex project, and so when you're buying property from corporations and different things, it's taken quite a while to get to where we are, but I'm really proud to say that we've gotten that done, and we're moving forward from there. The other thing, thank you to Director Broscheid for giving this direction, but we have established a team of employees here in this agency to really focus on Cameo. Folks from engineering and from real estate and GIS and field operate all across different folks that have different expertise in these types of matters. And it's been really refreshing to get so many different people engaged in this and have a lot of ownership going on. So thank you to Director Broscheid. And I want to especially pick out two of those individuals who have just taken on an incredible load. John Holst, the Southwest Energy Liaison, has been phenomenal in this project, and Gene Potter, who has been the lead designer and engineer, you know, they're spending a ton of time, and I can't thank those guys enough, so it's been really great. The other thing that we did this last fall, I think it was about October or so, is we were able to retain a consultant, C. Vargas and Associates out of Jacksonville, Florida. This is a group that specializes in shooting range design, and so C. Vargas and some of his business associates are helping us with this conceptual draft design and bringing a lot of input into this project from not just the design aspect, but lead remediation, noise remediation, working with the community and the public, engagement. One of the greatest things that I think that we've done thus far with this project was have a 3-day meeting here in Grand Junction where we reached out to all the sanctioning bodies of shooting sports, and some of these folks right here, the faces and shirts you can see. These people are professionals in shooting sports, whether they compete or whether they work in the industry, but these people know what it takes. I mean, if we're actually going to design and construct a world-class shooting sports facility, these are the people that need to direct us in how we get about doing that. They've shot all over the nation and a few of these folks around the world. We've got a couple world record holders and a national champion right back here in the back. Who better to listen to that knows how a range should be run and designed than these guys. So I really appreciate that help. Lastly, and again to expedite this, because I am the least important person today to talk, for me, thank you to Regional Manager Ron Velarde and Deputy Regional Manager Dean Riggs and Troy Geringer, our heavy equipment operator. We were able to get out and build a temporary 3-bench, 100-yard range out at Cameo just to give the public what we've been telling them and promising them that we would give them, and that's an opportunity to go safely shoot out there and create that stamina and buzz that we've got. This is an awesome project, and it truly is an honor. I'm humbled to be working on this, and it's just been super fun. So the last time I talked to the commission, it seemed to me that there was a few different things that you folks wanted me to focus on, and today's opportunity for me is to bring some of that back to you. And the number one thing I think was kind of the business aspect of this project. What's this mean? From a financial standpoint, from FTEs, from marketing, from design, from a business perspective, what does this mean? And so I'm really lucky today to have Bill Booth with Interact Business Group, who is part of the C. Vargas firm consulting. He's the one developing the business plan for this project, and so I'm gonna bring him up in just a second, and then right after we get done with that, and I should have time, we'll push along here. If we've got some time, I'd like to get John Holst up here to talk about some of the due diligence work that we've been doing with from the environmental perspective. So I think those were some of the major components that this commission asked me to really focus on and bring back to you guys. So I'm proud to do that today, and hopefully this meets you guys' needs. And with that, I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Bill Booth with Interact Business Group. Thank you, guys.
Welcome, Mr. Booth.
Good morning. Good morning.
Please tell us a little bit about your company and where you're from.
Okay.
Sorry, pardon us.
Sure. I'm with Interact Business Group, a company that I started over 25 years ago now. I'm based out of San Diego. My colleague who's with me, Jeff Ringelman, is based out of the hill country of Texas, outside of Austin, a small town called Wimberley. And we write strategic business plans across the country for public safety, in a lot of areas of gun ranges, for law enforcement, fire training centers, actually. We exhibited earlier this week, in fact, at the National Crime Lab Directors Conference in Dallas, Texas. So we are involved with public safety, and shooting is a part of that. We've got a quick 7-slide presentation. I understand we have 46 minutes, is it up to now, for the presentation. We're going to go through it and run through some numbers. My colleague, Jeff Ringelman, is going to start off by giving you some of the demographic and some of the competitive environment areas that we've investigated here in the region, and then I'm going to follow up with some of the numbers. So Jeff, if you can go through.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be here. Jeff Ringelman, working with Bill Booth here with Interact Business Group. I just wanted to briefly touch on 3 elements of the business plan. We're making great progress on the business plan component of this master plan effort, and hopefully I can get this to work. One of the elements we thought was really important from a business perspective is doing an area background review. Specifically, what's offered at Palisade, what's offered in the Grand Junction area, what would, besides building a world-class shooting sports complex and outdoor education complex, what else would attract people? Will the community support the potential and hopefully large groups of shooters coming in for large-scale events, not only the day-type shooter, the people who live close by, but also attracting from far away, hotels, restaurants, things to do, other forms of entertainment in addition to the shooting sports. So one portion of our report has taken a look at those and I think really nicely displays the wonderful offerings that are available in this part of Colorado. And also important to that is the orientation towards the economic benefits that a facility such as Cameo would bring to the communities in the area. So that's an important aspect of this that we wanted to look at. We did a competitive analysis. We threw a very broad net out, about 300 miles from this area, including mostly in Colorado, but also out into Utah. We wanted to do benchmarking and take a look at other gun ranges, shooting sports facilities, and so on, and just kind of take a look at that competitive landscape and what's out there. We looked at things like the size of facilities, the types of ranges, the shooting sports that are supported at those various sites, different types of membership, different types of costs. We took a pretty intense look at all of those. We identified 30 different ones that we looked at, some as close as 8 miles, many 250, 300 miles away, more in the Denver metro area. What we found is the larger areas are the ones that tended to support several of the shooting sports that are envisioned to be supported at Cameo are quite some distance from here. None of the ones that we found would support all of the shooting skills types that are envisioned at Cameo. And there's really nothing out there in this competitive environment, in that competitive area, that would be like what's being talked about in the master plan at Cameo. We also did a national analysis of shooting skills type and the agencies, the organizations that support those. And we really wanted to look at the history and overview of those, and in particular, the current number of organized club, the numbers of members, and look at trends. Are those shooting sports increasing in popularity? Are they leveling off? Are they decreasing, including archery? And what we found almost across the board is they are all growing in popularity, some by leaps and bounds. In particular, I think the shooting sports that are more oriented towards hunters are always up there at a high level, but what we're seeing in trends are the shooting sports for non-hunters are increasing dramatically. They're gaining popularity. The numbers of shooters, the number of clubs in Colorado, all on the increase, yet the facilities aren't necessarily there to support all of that.
Sir, I'm sorry, can you get hard data on actual membership, either within Colorado or within the 300-mile radius of all of these clubs and organizations?
Yes, they're in the report.
Okay, good.
The report, the draft as it is now, has hard numbers of clubs, numbers of so we're just doing a brief overview here. Yes. So the skill types that we're looking at, the defensive pistol shooting represented by IDPA, practical shooting, the Single Action Society, skeet, and I would add also sporting clays to that, trap shooting, 3-gun, and on and on and on, as you can see there. So very wide variety and on all those on the upswing. So I certainly think that if Cameo were to be built as envisioned in the master plan to support these, and I'm sure you have folks here who would echo that sentiment that it's a very very likely that those kinds of facilities are going to be supported, they're going to be needed, and they're going to draw from a wide area. So that's my part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. One thing I want to add to one of the comments that JT made in his opening remarks, we had the 3-day intensive, we call them focus groups, brought the groups in here locally, talked to them, and spent one-on-one time with, what about the design? Are we doing it right? What about cost? Who will come, and so forth? I took away from that really an unexpected benefit. I had no idea how many world-class shooters that live in this part of Colorado. We've got national champions that we spoke to. We have 2 gentlemen that just took first and second in the state of Texas championship, first and second in the state of Arkansas championship. My gosh, this is a hotbed of world-class shooters. World-class shooters, as far as these gentlemen are concerned, also brings world-class competition. People from across the country and internationally will come and want to compete with the best of the best, and you have some of those right here in this side of the Rockies. So just want to throw that out there. We're going to go through some numbers. I have about 3 slides. We're looking at a phased project here. We're looking at phase 1. These are the ranges that are a part of the phase 1 build out and the design of the program at Cameo, and they're listed here. We did a needs analysis, cost analysis, and revenue analysis for the project under some considerations and assumptions. With regards to costing and pricing the facility, we have multiple levels of pricing. For example, we're calling them early bird half price. During the week, from 9 o'clock until noon, we're thinking about giving discount to people that would want to come, perhaps seniors that would want to come and shoot early in the mornings. Open shoots in the afternoon, league play, youth programs and educational programs. These are all different pricing levels and costing levels that we've put into the matrix. Again, it's all in the detail of the plan, but we've got different levels of pricing for the project. For example, we're going to have Wednesday afternoon youth shooting, where actually people under 18 can come to Cameo at no cost to shoot, to bring in the younger shooters, accompanied with an adult, of course. In the numbers I'm going to show you, some of the assumptions that we did. The assumptions, we will be operational 45 weeks a year out of Cameo. The hours of operation are 7 a.m. To 9 p.m., 7 days a week. Shooters will stay around 2 hours to shoot. That's kind of the national number. Very strong local shooting community, including several national champs and world champions. I mentioned that already. Club, regional, and national events each weekend. We're going to alternate different events where the clubs will come in and take over part of Cameo to hold their regional state events and regional events, which will draw large numbers of visitors to the area, bringing in economic development revenue as well in the community. We've come up with 5 different levels in our forecasting and our modeling based on the different capacities of the ranges. We know how many shooting positions are at each range. We're making an assumption of 2 hours per shooter will come there and use that position. At 100% capacity, 75, 50, 40, and 25. And these are the totals there. Summary of revenues on the left, or the middle column, number of users on the right. And about 25% usage, that's 25% of the range is being used. We're looking at about 45, almost 46,000 visitors a year to the facility. The revenue number, I want to point out, does not include any private sponsorships. We're going to talk in the report about setting up a foundation, a nonprofit foundation, where people can contribute to the facility. That number obviously isn't in here. Industry coming and sponsoring different shoots and contributing money to the range. That revenue number is not in this number as well. Preliminary annual O&M budget. Some of the highlights, we have a $20,000 per year line item for marketing the facility. We think that this is a very important line item in the ongoing operations of the facility. If it's going to be a world-class facility with national interest and worldwide interest, you have to have that known. So we've got a pretty, what I think is a pretty robust marketing number of $20,000 a year. Included in the O&M budget that I'm going to show next, facility site maintenance, maintaining the facilities, maintaining the equipment, maintaining the roads and access and so forth. There's budget line items for that. All that detail is in the report. Maintaining the actual shooting equipment, replacing the equipment, based on what the manufacturers have told us of typically what the maintenance cost is going to be on some of the equipment that'll be out there. And of course, the building utilities, turn the lights on and run power to the buildings. So, put all of that together, we come up with this slide here. We've got revenue at 25% at $769,000. Or I'm sorry, operating expenses, $769,000. Revenues, just under $800,000, with a kind of a cost-neutral number of about $28,000 a year at the 25% shooting level. And you can run across to see what happens at the 100% level. I think that we're comfortable forecasting a 25% utilization at the site. So the first column number there, I think, is a good number. It's a solid number. For example, we have a modest revenue projection for the retail shop. We're forecasting that when people come to Cameo, they'll spend about $5 at the retail shop, be buying sodas, potato chips, and so forth. The national average is runs somewhere between $8 and $12 a visitor. We're forecasting $5, trying to keep that number in a kind of a reasonable conservative area. That is included in the revenue number of $797 as well. The second bullet down at the bottom, the retail shop revenues include safety wear, food, beverages, ammunition, but no weapon sales. At this time, we don't anticipate selling any weapons out there. Again, the revenue number does not include industry salary, private sponsorships. So with that, that was my quick overview. JT?
Any commissioner questions?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Zip?
So, I guess it's a little surprised at the minor increase in estimated operating expenses going from 25% capacity to 100%. So, what is going into that increase? It's certainly not proportional, which is good. It looks like opportunity for more than sufficiency is there at 100%. But if you could just speak as to why the operating costs really aren't substantially different at 25% versus 100%, I'd appreciate it.
That's a great observation. You picked up on it immediately. The reason is that when we staff the facility, and staffing is the number one cost associated with running a facility like this, you need to have safety range masters out on the range, whether there's 3 ranges being used or all 9 ranges being used. You have to have the safety people there in place. And so the staff number is kind of built into the operations of the facility. And that's the biggest number of the O&M, so that's why it doesn't go up. If there's 5 people shooting at the range, or there's 10 people at the range, you've still got one person or a safety officer. It has to be there. So conversely, if there's 5 people on this range and 5 people on this range, you need safety people. If there's 10 people on a range or 25 people on a range, you still need to staff that number of people. That's why it doesn't go up.
Okay, so the capacities are usage, not build out. I guess I was assuming at the 100% capacity and 25% capacity, there's going to be a difference in number of ranges open, but that's not.
No, the capacity, I'm sorry, the capacity talks to the number of people.
Okay, I see.
You have 12 shooting positions. If all 12 are used, that's 100% capacity.
Right.
If you have 4 people, it's less.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Mr. Vigil?
So I guess basically what you're saying is that the majority of the operating expenses are fixed costs. So the variable costs are a small component. That's surprising for a financial person to say, you got to have more variable costs included. I mean, you got range cleanup and just that kind of stuff. So as your capacity goes up, you've got more stuff to clean up. Are you taking that kind of stuff into account?
Yes, in the build-out of the capacity, the O&M, the operations expenses you see do go up, but most of that increase is increase in replacement of equipment, targeting systems that will burn out. So we are increasing that. So yes, those numbers do increase more at the capacity. They really begin to take off, I think, between 25 and 50%. It's about static, but then you get the 7,500, it really, so we're replacing a lot of throwers, a lot of the targeting equipment at that range, at that level. And so they do go up, and those numbers reflect the increase in mainly, I think, equipment replacement and cleanup and so forth. But the staffing is the big number, and it stays linear across the number.
Yeah, you're saying that's a fixed cost, the staffing,
Yes,
which
that
is
is
understandable
correct.
in an operation like this.
If you have, again, if you have 20 people out at Cameo, you have a fixed cost to service those 20. If there happen to be 40 out there, you still got the fixed cost.
Sure.
Are we contemplating that the staff manage, are uniformed CPW employees, or is this an independent operation of some sort?
These would be staffed by Colorado Parks and Wildlife. These would be full-time employees.
Okay.
And volunteers and part-time individuals as well.
So ultimately, we have to build into our budget process some FTE growth, potentially. Okay. Other commissioner questions? Mr. Vigil?
In the details, are we going to see the breakdown of those estimated operating costs by personnel versus other costs, and including depreciation in the full plan when it's completed?
The detailed O&M cost is about 35 to 40 line items that lines all of those out.
Well, I think that's what we need to see at some point.
Sure, and you have, I have a preliminary one here. If we had time this morning or after the meeting, we certainly can show that to you. It's preliminary. It will be in the final plan, and it's pretty detailed.
Okay.
Mr. Howard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted, I feel like all I do in this meeting is talk about GOCO, but we did have a substantial discussion at Parks and Wildlife Subcommittee about this project. And it ties back to the RFP discussion we had earlier, which is if we can't spend that money in our traditional ways, could we accelerate Cameo's rollout? And to my, I don't know if it's fair to say to my surprise, but there was some interest within GOCO in doing that. And so that leads to a little bit of an opportunity. We might have more capital available to speed up the rollout. I noted, just looking at the ranges, these are all short range and very valuable, but I drive 3.5 hours from Boulder now to Salida to shoot long range. And it has two principal things. First, hunting ethics. We all know that when you take a long shot, it's harder to have that one shot, one kill, unless you're Commissioner Zimmerman, who I understand is quite a shot. So, I think people on the Front Range would drive to Cameo for that opportunity. It's a very fast-growing part of the shooting community. I'm shocked at people out shooting at 800, 900. That's not necessarily for hunting, but it's a huge, fast-growing part of, at least anecdotally, of the shooting community. So I just would encourage to think big, because it may be that we can change these numbers in our favor, more profit. We're seeing the fixed costs are we're seeing the operation and maintenance costs are more fixed, and I agree, than I'm used to seeing. So if we had a bigger facility with more ranges, with more types of ranges, we might be able to get the profit up. And so I would just encourage us to think about that.
Mr. Commissioner Howard, to your point, you're absolutely right. And I think when we were going through our strategic plan, we've got fish and wildlife management, we've got outdoor recreation, and the third line of business is shooting sports. And just so everybody knows, I mean, it's not just the hunter who's going and sighting in a rifle, but we got to keep in mind is public lands are becoming decreasingly open to shooting. And it's a competition, and it's a space issue, it's a safety issue, it's a resource issue, we all know, but everybody's got to remember that 10 to 11% of every rifle, pistol, shotgun, and ammunition is a tax. It's an excise tax that is coming back to the agency in the states under Pittman Robertson, Dingell Johnson. Pittman Robertson's fun, and so this is a real business model of that. It's not necessarily the number of shooters that are coming to a range. This is a funding model that's going to support all of our shooting ranges, and the more shooters that we can bring in and provide opportunities like this, the more they're spending on that equipment, and it's coming back. So it's that circular model of funding that we've got. With embedded in it is this, that the program income that this can generate. So I think we talked about that at length, and when we talked about the strategic plan, and this is, seeing and working at Ben Avery Shooting Facility and seeing what this does to the shooters, and seeing these events that these guys participate in and show up, and then the economic impact that's going to come to this county and to this area. We're really undervaluing what that's going to be. So I just wanted everybody to keep in mind about that excise tax, and that we've got to start providing those opportunities for those shooters now in a safe and diverse way, because I think you mentioned is that this is growing, and these are growing competitions, and some of these folks are never by hunting or fishing license.
Director, so I want to make sure I understand you correctly. So are you saying that increased purchases caused by the availability of this facility, purchases within Colorado, add to the PR distribution to come back to Colorado?
Extremely, and it's probably, Mr. Chair, it's probably the largest contribution that is made, where shooters are slowly starting to surpass hunters and anglers in that contribution. It's truly a growing nationwide, international competition, as you guys know.
So is the PR distribution based on, in effect, gross revenues of eligible items within a given state?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Not the number of hunting licenses or anything like that. Got it. All right, Mr. Howard.
So just to follow up, again, I mean, I would encourage us to think big. Maybe this is not as aggressive as we could be. We may have partner funds at GOCO available. And also, just because, we always talk about conservation at GOCO, this is a brownfield. Mm-hmm. This is at the heart of the conservation movement, taking something that was a power plant and putting it to public use. And so, I think we also have to think about that in our marketing, because it's a great project, not just from shooting's perspective, but from conservation. Thank you.
Other questions? That's right.
Mr. Chair, how much time do we have left?
You have at least 15 minutes if you
15?
care.
That's spot on.
We're not going to see a dance, right?
I'll tell you what, if John Holst can get done early, I'll bring Regional Manager Dorsey up to show us what she meant about the sprinkler.
And JT, we're easy.
I know. John Holst, thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, pleasure to be here. John Holst, Southwest Region Energy Liaison. Other duties as assigned. Let's see here. So I'm going to try and outline for you briefly CPW's review of the environmental conditions at Cameo and our plan to manage those conditions going forward. I've got about 8 or 9 slides that include a variety of aerial images and information gathered from the Phase 1 environmental assessment that was done on the property. But real quickly here, most of you are aware, but I need to get you up to speed on how we got where we are. There are a long history of industrial uses at Cameo. The site was a coal mine for about 100 years, from 1899 to 1999, or 1899 to 1999. In addition, there were 2 coal-fired generating units that were constructed in the late 1950s that operated until 2010. This aerial image shows you the areas of the surface at Cameo that were disturbed by mining activities. It's tough to see in the sliding, but in the sort of lower right corner there, you can see where the plant site is, if you're familiar with the area. You can see the Colorado River there. Let's see, do I have a pointer? I do have a pointer. You can see the Colorado River there, and then this is the Government Highline Canal. This is the plant site right here, where there's an existing, still there, Xcel substation. This area here is known as the North Mine Portal. That's where coal was extracted from the underground Cameo coal mine, and then it was minimally processed, transferred over to here to a coal storage facility, or a coal pile, and then transferred to the plant to be burned. These 2 areas up here are actual, they look like surface coal mines, but what they really are is they're called coal refuse disposal piles. That's where low-grade coal was taken and stored and eventually buried and reclaimed. So CPW hired an environmental contractor, Rare Earth Environmental, to complete a Phase 1 environmental site assessment in 2014. That Phase 1 site assessment identified a number of recognized environmental conditions at the site. That Phase 1 also recommended that CPW complete a Phase 2 environmental site assessment to further characterize those recognized environmental conditions that intersected with proposed public use facilities or other infrastructure that CPW needed to construct for the shooting range. The Phase 2 was essentially put on hold while the town of Palisade arranged to purchase the property, and while CPW negotiated an access agreement between us and the town of Palisade. That access agreement was signed in October, I think, of 2016. Our project team chose to push forward with a conceptual facility design that JT showed you earlier. The intent of that was to really focus our Phase 2 efforts and to hopefully limit the Phase 2 costs to those areas that would actually be impacted by proposed facilities. And our project team, design team's initial philosophy was to try and see if they couldn't design the shooting range to avoid those environmental conditions to the extent possible. So this image shows the entire Cameo property outlined in blue. The recognized environmental conditions that were identified in the Phase 1 are also shown. You can see they are more or less consolidated around the old plant site here. These are the old coal refuse disposal areas that have been reclaimed. Something that I will point out, which I guess is the good news here, is that there are very large portions of the Cameo property that were not impacted on the surface by mining activities. In addition, this yellow area here actually was not acquired by the town of Palisade. This area is an ash disposal pile that was retained by Xcel, and we are not proposing to construct any shooting range facilities at that location. So I just changed colors on you a bit. You have this in your handouts too. The recognized environmental conditions are also identified on this image, slightly different colors. Really what this image, what I wanted to show you here is where the underground mine workings were. So if you look, this black crosshatch area here is the old underground Cameo coal mine. The purple up here is the old underground mine workings for the Snowcap coal mine. No impacts on the surface in those areas per se, but we do need to think about subsidence issues in those areas. The other layer that was added to this image is this green layer here, and what that shows you is areas that have undergone reclamation by Snowcap under their permit with the Division of Reclamation, Mining, and Safety. That area has been completely reclaimed with the exception of about 4 acres where they expect to get bond release in the next 60 days. So this is a zoom in of the area around the plant site. So this, right here, this red area is the existing Excel substation. This is sort of the same color scheme. We added to this, I guess this image, some labels, a combination of letters and numbers. The letters and numbers really aren't important, but what's important, I guess, for you today is that we also color-coded the labels. So area, labels that are in red are areas that our environmental contractor suggested that we stay away from due to the character of the recognized environmental condition in that area. In some cases, it's, some of those areas have restrictive covenants on them placed by the Department of Health. Areas that are labeled in yellow, like this D1 and C4 up here, are areas where our environmental contractor recommended that we complete a phase 2 prior to planning facilities in those areas. And then areas that are labeled in green, A1 and A2 up here, and C1 are areas where our environmental contractor indicated it was okay to go ahead and plan facilities, but we might have to take into account how those areas were reclaimed. So this image shows you our initial kind of conceptual facility design back in December. The shooting range facilities is shown in brown and red here. And you can see we made a pretty good attempt to try and avoid those recognized environmental conditions that are really focused over here. In fact, let me go back here. Whoops. Other way. Just another point on this map. So this area where the old plant site was between the Government Highline Canal and the Colorado River down here is an area, so this area I'm outlining right here. Our project team decided that due to the complicated history of this area, that we were not going to attempt to plan shooting range facilities in that area. The only exception to that is this area D1. We are still evaluating that area for potential facilities. So again, here's our initial conceptual design. You can see we didn't plan any facilities in that area. And this is the revised conceptual design. This design was based on those stakeholder meetings that Bill Booth talked about. You can see that the number of shooting bays up here identified in blue has changed, and the numbers and types of facilities have changed somewhat, and the locations, their locations on the property have changed as well. So this next image, I'll overlay those recognized environmental conditions so you can see how we match up here. So this is a zoom in again. This is Government Highline Canal. This is the Colorado River down here. This image incorporates those environmental conditions. So the color-coded labels are actually show the environmental conditions as they're labeled. So these green areas were labeled as green up here. You can see where those first phase shooting ranges are laid out. The yellow area here is an area that may require some further investigation. Red area down here is an area to stay away from. So even with this revised conceptual facility design, you can see for the most part, we were able to avoid recognized environmental conditions. The exception is down here. We have this circle is a proposed sporting clays facility. We are currently deliberating where that might go on the property if it can't fit here, which you can see it looks like it's not going to fit very well without intersecting some areas that we indicated we would stay away from. So given that conceptual design, what's our path forward? So we retained the same environmental contractor, Rare Earth Environmental, to evaluate our new preliminary facility design and come up with a phase 2 scope of work for those areas where the recognized environmental conditions overlap with our proposed facilities. Our project team's going to review that estimated scope of work for the phase 2, along with any design constraints that he recommends, to determine our responsible path forward in those areas. When we say that, what do we mean by responsible path? Well, up to this point, we've used kind of an iterative approach as we tried to lay out facilities. Where we lay them out, we look to see what the environmental condition is in that location and try and move it around to the extent we can to determine if we can avoid it or if we actually need to do a phase 2. So, and just as a final point here, once we do finalize our actual design for sort of certain, we're going to need to actually bid out the actual phase 2 sampling work and any construction compliance monitoring that's required by or recommended by the phase 2 report. So with that, that's the end. I'll take any questions.
Commissioners? Anyone? What's your estimated cost, if any, of this Phase 2 assessment that needs to be done?
It's still in flux, depending on where we actually, like, if we can relocate that sporting clays facility, then that won't be an area where we need to do a Phase 2. So we're hoping to have an estimated cost by midsummer this summer. So we don't currently have an estimated cost for the Phase 2. It depends on the type of facility and where we plan it. I mean, just to give you a quick example. So this is a great example. So this area right here in yellow was an old spray pond where they cleaned the coal. That area actually received clean closure by the Department of Health. But the Phase 1 environmental site assessment, our consultant recommended that if we were going to excavate to a certain depth there, we should probably sample because of how it was closed. Well, the current design just proposes a parking lot there. And so if this design stays as it is, we really don't need to conduct a Phase 2 in that particular location. So the two things, we have this sort of chicken and egg where we're trying to get the facility design down to determine the scope of the Phase 2. But we need some of those like if we really want to move this forward, we're going to have to really sort that area out, and that will have some costs.
And who's liable for the Phase 2 costs? I assume it's us, right?
We are, yeah, it's all for our benefits, so we pay for the Phase 2.
Other questions? Hearing none, JT.
Thanks, John. Great job. Thank you, Commissioners. I really appreciate the time today again. This is an exciting project. I think I'll just end on a couple points. So, I'm really pushing forward on this thing. We've got some incredible financial opportunities and partners out there in the corporate world, and so we've got some neat things to look forward to. I'm pushing for an opening date of January of 2018, and I know that's, I've told everybody that every date I've set thus far is about 8 months to a year short. But you know what? It doesn't hurt to set a date and drive hard. So that's the goal here, and I love the input. Thank you for everything so much. Director Broscheid, an incredible advocate for this, and the governor's office, Executive Director Randall, too. Just can't say enough for all the support in this local community. Town of Palisade, Xcel Energy, Snowcap. This is similar to the speech I'm going to give in front of the governor, but I've got to applaud these people for thinking outside of the box and really drumming up a super unique economic development project that is just going to have so many different facets to benefit communities and this state, and it's remarkable to work on. So with that, I'm going to hopefully get you back on track, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much.
Thank you. But JT, give us a pitch for the May 20th event, please.
Right, yes, you're all invited, as Mr. Velarde told you yesterday, May 20th at the site at Cameo. We've sent out invitations to about 250 individuals so far. I think we've gotten responses back from a little over half, so that's great. We're expecting somewhere around 200 people. The governor will be over here. Our good director and executive director both will be there. We're going to have a ceremony and celebrate that we've gotten this far, and the future is looking really bright for this project. And we're going to, it's not a ribbon cutting or a shovel dirt tossing thing. It's going to be, we're going to pull a trigger, and we're going to have a first shot ceremony out there, and the governor's going to do that with a local manufacturer custom-built rifle. So we've got a bunch of manufacturers. We've got incredible corporate support. We have shooters and so many people coming out. It's going to be a really great venue. So if you can make it, I'd love to see you there. I look forward to it.
Very good. Are there any commissioners currently planning to attend? Mr. Bray? And I'll come, JT.
I'm going to try, I'm not definite.
Jeannie? Good, excellent. John? Great.
Great.
Well, we'll look forward to everyone, seeing everybody there.
I love it. Thank you.
Any last questions for JT? No? Excellent, JT. You're right, spot on. Perfect timing. All right, we'll take
no dancing.
Thank you. So we'll take a 15-minute break and reconvene at 10:20. Right on schedule.
He's ready, but.
Oh. Mr. McLaughlin, are you about ready? We need some, I think we got some missing commissioners, but we're going to go ahead and start reasonably close to on time. Craig McLaughlin and big game GPS locations, or I assume this is not GPS locations, but rather big game locations identified by
That's correct.
GPS.
That's correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. I would want to just take a brief minute here to make a segue into our big game license recommendations with a short and I think light presentation. You recall that you have fielded and you have passed some of these questions on to us about a lowered success rate, big game hunters last fall. It was an unusually warm fall. But rather than us just telling you that because of whether we believe something has happened, we are able to, at least in part of the state, we're able to show you using some of the information and the technology that we use to monitor big game populations, to show you some real differences in movements of animals last fall versus previous seasons. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Darby Finley, our area biologist that is operating in several projects, one in which will allow us to take a look at elk movements last fall and perhaps put a little bit of a point on, a little bit more of an explanation on our answer to you about, you and the public, about different movements of animals last fall versus previous years. Darby.
Thanks, Craig. Commissioners, thanks for having me. Darby Finley. I'm a terrestrial biologist out of Meeker, and I have management responsibilities for Craig and Rangeley as well. So what I'm going to show you today is kind of a brief presentation of some of the work that we have going on in the Bears Ears and White River elk herds. We've got about 135 elk collared up in that country, and I'll help orient us here in a couple slides to let you know where we're talking about. These are two of the largest elk herds we have in the state. E2 is estimated just over 20,000 elk, and the White River herd is estimated over just over 40,000 elk. These are very robust, productive elk herds. We've got good calf ratios, good productivity at, averaging in the high 40s to mid 50s per 100 cows per 100 cows, and they're managed for opportunity. So we have over-the-counter bull licenses, second and third seasons, with limited bull licenses, first and fourth seasons, as well as limited cow seasons in these units. Just some background to kind of explain the differences between the hunting season of 2015 versus hunting season of 2016. In the Bears Ears and White River herds, we achieved 100% of our antlerless objective during those seasons, and that's usually reflective of good elk movement to provide hunters good success and opportunity to harvest elk. And in 2016, you can see we were about 20% less than that. So 2015 characterized by more of a seasonable weather that we had. Usually we get a storm around Halloween that really is the catalyst for movement of elk off their summer ranges down to lower elevations as they head to their winter range and across areas where they're more susceptible to harvest. And in 2016, it was 7 degrees and sunny most of the time. So it made for a tough elk hunt for hunters. In January 2015, we deployed 135 satellite collars on cows. This project was initiated by the HPP committees out of the Craig and Meeker areas in an effort to better assess general distribution of animals across these two herd units, as well as provide information as to where to maybe conduct some habitat treatments to benefit and mitigate some game damage issues that we have on certain winters up there. So these collars record 2 locations a day. They're at a 12-hour interval, and I'll go through a series of animated slides here to kind of show how those elk moved during that time. So to kind of orient everybody where we're at. We're in Grand Junction down here. This is the Northwest Regional boundary on this slide. And then you can see the Bears Ears herd, which is north of the Yampa River to the Wyoming state line. And the White River elk herd is there just predominantly north and east of Meeker, but those elk do travel west. Generally, in general terms, the elk summer in the Flat Tops area, as well as in the mountains here north of Hayden, Steamboat area, northwest of Craig, or northeast of Craig, and then they cross and move easterly to winter ranges and across Highway 13. And Highway 13 is kind of a major, the highway that runs from I-70 up to the Wyoming state line, and that's kind of the dividing line generally between summer range and winter range for these animals. So here you see the 2015 hunting season, and this reflects locations of about 90 collared elk that we have out there. And this is where these animals were first season. You can see second season movements here coming up. Not a lot of movement, which is generally typical of what we see. Third season, if we get weather, these elk start to move. And this is those blue dots are dots that you want to pay attention to recognize the difference between how these elk move between 2015 and 2016. And then fourth season, if we get even more weather, a good shot of snow that first part of November, these elk will move, and they will cross Highway 13, and that's where we have more public land, more sagebrush type country where these elk are more susceptible to harvest. And so you can see how these elk did move around a little bit more 2015 compared to 2016 when we go through this series of slides here. So this first season again, same number of elk. Second season, we get one individual here that decided about 1 in the morning she's going to take off and make a run for it across Highway 13, and she lasted about 2 days and turned around and went back. She didn't like what she ran into out there. And you can see here, this is third season. Again, very little movement, with the exception of these couple individuals down here. They pretty much stayed put. And fourth season, again, didn't move. So when the elk don't move in this particular area, it's hard for hunters to be able to locate them. They get to either deep, dark, nasty spots where nobody wants to go get them, or they find little refuge areas, whether it be on private land, that they don't move unless weather moves them. These slides here take all those dots and throughout the hunting seasons and provide a spatial footprint as to what that looks like across the landscape. And this is a representation of about 20 elk that were captured inside this highlighted area here, which is Little Buck Mountain, north of Craig. There's Craig, Colorado right there. If you follow Highway 13, it's about 15 miles north of Craig. But we put collars in here to assess some habitat work that's being done and how those elk move. And these are gradients of use, the color shading on this map, to kind of show how these elk use these areas. So the darker the color, the higher the use by the elk. And so you can see in 2015, this particular herd segment that winters on Little Buck, they moved back into where they were captured here by the end of the fourth season. If you compare that to what things look like 2016, you had one individual that moved back into to where they were captured, and most of those captures were done in January. But there was just relatively little movement compared to what we saw in 2015. This is Oak Ridge. This is an area down by Meeker. This is our Oak Ridge State Wildlife Area, kind of in the heart of this highlighted polygon you see here. And you can see here that we did have some elk moving off of their summer ranges at these higher elevations, making that easterly movement down to lower elevations. And you can see there in 2016 you had very little movement relative to what you did in 2016. So just a quick little story about how the difference between those two seasons and kind of what we see and hear as far as some of the frustration back from hunters when weather doesn't cooperate to move these animals. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Commissioner questions? Mr. Bray?
Thank you. I find this fascinating. I mean, it's great. We had the same thing in the Southwest, exact same thing, weather-related thing. I think the message, are you going to continue to monitor this for another couple of seasons?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is a project we're hoping the battery life on these collars will last 4 years, maybe 5. It's a new technology that one of the companies we use came out with as a survey collar, and we'll write out the life of these batteries, and if funds permit, probably continue with the study longer term.
I think something we can garner and learn from this, climate change is what it is. And if these weather patterns persist and we still need to get our harvest objectives and hunter satisfaction stuff, this may be information we can use to set season dates and modify that way in the next season structure and stuff. I mean, it's way preliminary, but it's valuable data, and I see real use for it in season structure and season dates discussions going forward.
Oh, absolutely, I agree. There's a real informational process that can take place.
I'd like to do
in
the same
informing
thing
those.
with deer.
And we do. We have actually 260 deer collars out, following the same. I emphasized elk here because deer are more programmed to the calendar in which they move, at least in our country, and they make subtle movements based on weather, but the elk kind of demonstrated the movement a little bit better.
Very good. I really appreciate the information.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I think we've got one public comment.
Question. Did you say that they were hanging in all that habitat work that you were doing?
Excuse me, Denny.
I'm sorry.
Why don't you, well, we don't normally entertain questions from the audience, so if you want to come up during your public comment period and ask a question. But and I think you're signed up to speak anyway, or, right, for public comment? And I want to hear your question, but if we start taking questions from the audience during the normal course of business, we'd never get anything done. So Darby, why don't you just stay up here for a second? Because I think you can come up for public comment, or is there more to the presentation?
No, there's no more to the presentation.
So, did you want to comment on?
I just had a question.
Come on up then. Identify yourself. I'll give you the 3 minutes. Although I have you signed up for public comment. Was this the issue you wanted to comment about?
No, that was for the other segment, but I just had a comment on this, so.
Well, I know, but Denny, you know how we operate.
I understand.
Used to
I'm
be
getting
in this-
old. I just forgot.
Yeah, listen. I'm in the same boat, buddy. I may be older than you are.
I don't think so. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking
Before you
to
go
it,
on,
so.
because I don't want to miss this opportunity when we're talking about.
All right, I'm sorry.
Just hang on a second. I want to recognize the presence of Lena Watson in the back of the room before she slips out of the door. One of the kindest, gentlest souls you'll ever meet, who served on the Colorado State Parks Board for many years, and then on the transition of the merged Parks and Wildlife Agency, leading a proponent of trails and outdoor recreation and parks throughout Mesa County and the Grand Valley area. So welcome, Lena. Great to see you. Just want to make sure that we know she's here. So with that, now Mr. Behrens, please.
Thank you, Mr.
The old guy question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, and I apologize for that. I just had a question. So I know in 2007 and 2008, the division did quite a bit of habitat work in the Oak Creek area. So are them elk staying in all that basically new habitat area? Was that what we were seeing?
Yeah, that was the Oak Ridge State Wildlife Area, and yeah, we've started in 2008, 2009, doing a bunch of habitat work in there, and that's kind of what spurred the initial purchase and deployment of these collars, and that's a whole nother presentation in and of itself that we could go into to look at how those elk are using that, and we're in the process of actually analyzing a lot of that information now.
All right. Very good. I'm sorry. Commissioner Horn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Darby, I just wanted to say thank you. And it's unfortunate sometimes that this kind of information is not easily accessible by our hunters, because as you well know, in northwest Colorado last year, the harvest was down. Your numbers showed that, not just with antlerless, but bull as well. And the hunters are saying, well, there's no elk. The elk are gone. No, they're not. They're there. And your Collard study shows that. They're just, as you mentioned earlier, in either inaccessible areas to most hunters or the deep, dark hiding places that they know. And with unnormal weather conditions, they didn't move in their normal pattern. So the elk were there. But again, it's tough to communicate that to our hunting public. And I don't know through our website if there's a way that this information for inquiring minds want to know, for those hunters that did say, the elk, we just don't have the elk anymore. No, give them an opportunity to go look at some basics of a study like this. I just think that would be good information for our hunters when they were singing the blues. I mean, you guys heard it. They were,
Yep.
Our hunters weren't. We did great. let me just say, because we know where those dark holes are and we're horseback. So our hunters did really well. But the general hunter in the northwest area was very disappointed on last year. And I just think if that's information we could put somewhere on the website and make it accessible to someone to see this kind of study.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, and I'll inquire about that and see what we can do.
Inquiring minds.
Yep.
Thanks, Darby.
Okay, any other commissioner? Okay, very good. Thank you, Darby.
Thank you.
And we'll now go to the next agenda item, which is number 24, final regulation, chapter W2, big game, with Danielle Eisenhart and her colleagues, Andy Holland and Jerry Apker, if he's.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Director Broscheid. I'm Danielle Eisenhart, Regulations Manager for CPW, and I have a really short part of this presentation. I have a few things I wanted to cover before I hand it over to Andy and Matt this morning. So looking at agenda item number 24, which is going to be brown in color, it's a final action item up for your consideration. The first thing you'll see in that agenda item is a regulations memo, followed by a memo signed by Director Broscheid, which summarizes our big game limited license recommendations for 2017. Next, you'll see several spreadsheets with our specific 2017 license recommendations, followed by the Chapter W2 regulations. And those are again for deer, elk, antelope, moose, and bear. So the two quick items I wanted to cover before I hand it over to Andy and Matt. On page 2, you'll see a new definition in the LPP for agricultural lands. The LPP definition for agricultural land has been modified so that properties that are truly agricultural in nature, yet zoned differently by their counties, such as nonprofit or as homeowners, could still be eligible to enroll in this program. We saw this discrepancy in a couple properties in Douglas County, including the Cherokee Ranch. The other cleanup that we have is on page 18 to our Dream Hunt, Regulation 206B4H1, for consistency with our state statute and to clarify that 21-year-olds that have a terminal illness or life-threatening disease would still be eligible to participate. We tweaked that language. The previous language between the ages of made it unclear if 12-year-olds and 21-year-olds were eligible. So those were the only two cleanup items I had for W2, and I can turn it over to Andy and Matt.
Mr. Chairman.
Danielle, please hang on. Commissioner Rivera.
Danielle, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the agricultural definition, can you refresh my memory exactly what we're talking about here? I must have slept or something, because I'm not quite understanding what we're trying to do here with that.
So in the original regulation, it said that the property had to be zoned as agricultural. But we have a few exceptions where some counties zone properties a little different than other counties. So like in Douglas County, they would zone a property as being like homeowners or nonprofit, even if it is like the Cherokee Ranch, a truly agricultural property. So we worked with Councilor Monahan to tweak that language so that we could try to make sure all properties that are truly agricultural could be enrolled in LPP.
Okay, the problem I potentially see is I wouldn't want a homeowners association going into the landowner program. That wouldn't be a good idea. So these exceptions you're talking about are privately owned, legitimate ag operations. It's just a zoning issue, it's not an ownership issue.
Correct. And we tried to tweak the language to make it clear that they have to truly be used for agricultural purposes.
And it doesn't address the ownership issue. I would be really, really worried about a homeowners association, for example, having access to the program. I understand if the property is zoned, but it's owned all by one ag operation, I guess I don't have an issue with that, but just like.
Anyone else? Okay, bring Andy up, please.
Is that a language change, Mr. Chairman?
I would like to, is there a chance we could
Danielle?
study that a little more and get a little more answers on that question before we rubber stamp it?
We can definitely remove that final change and come back to you with some
would
other
like to.
alternatives for you to consider.
Yeah, I would just like to understand it better. That would be helpful for me. So I would ask to remove that for this consideration at this point.
So we're lacking a formal parliamentarian, so.
A little more discussion.
Sure, please, absolutely. Commissioner Zip.
Maybe, I guess if there is a verification component that might address, I mean, is the issue who gets the tag, or is the issue, is that land actually being used for agricultural purposes, which should therefore be, qualify for the program, not necessarily what entity owns that land, but that it is private land being used for agricultural purposes. So if we're going to expand the definition, whether it's, I guess, are you asking for verification? How do we know that?
Yeah, I'm asking to just understand it better. This is the first time I've seen it.
Let's do one at a time and stay in. So we had, are you done, Alex?
I'm done, yeah. I just wanted to.
Mr. Pizell.
So just real quickly, in our area, we have an old historic ranch that was agriculture, became a subdivision, and is still classified as agricultural through the county for tax purposes. And so I think Commissioner Bray is saying they should not, and they should not be in the program.
Right.
It's not legitimately agricultural land.
Mr. Behill.
Yes, and that's real common in Los Animas County, where big ranches have been bought by developers. They subdivide it into 30-acre tracts, and somebody runs 7 cows on it, leases it for 7 cows, and so they're $1 million homes. The home is okay, that's appraised at its value, but the 34 acres, or 29 acres that it sits on, is agricultural land. And it's a real contentious point, because they're getting ag rates because there's 7 cows running around on maybe 20,000 acres of that subdivision.
Free common tax evasion scheme.
Right, and then, so what we'd be doing is adding them into this.
And I don't think they belong in the program.
No.
Right.
No, it's kind of the opposite. We're talking about properties that aren't zoned as agriculture, that truly are agriculture. So we're kind of doing the opposite of the example that Commissioner Vigil brought up. And one point of clarification, our staff do verify all of these applications to enroll in the program, and part of their verification is to look at the zoning and to look if it's truly agricultural. So that step would still occur within staff. Our staff would still be going out and evaluating these properties.
All right, so,
I would worry that that would open up a lawsuit, and then somebody says it is agriculture, because I got 7 cows on that 20